Ancient and medieval warfare was not the heroic spectacle often shown in films. Battles were chaotic, fast, and driven by discipline rather than glory. Soldiers fought in close formations, using simple but effective weapons. Most were ordinary men with little training and poor equipment. Combat relied on strength, coordination, and survival instincts. The real experience of war was harsh, exhausting, and far removed from romantic depictions of knights and heroes. Number 1. When battles were personal. Ancient and medieval combat took place at close range. Armies fought face to face. Weapons and armor were made for direct contact. Most soldiers stood within a few feet of the enemy. A Roman formation kept men shoulder to shoulder with overlapping shields. Soldiers advanced in tight ranks. Their short swords were designed for stabbing, not swinging. This made combat faster and more controlled. Greek hoplites fought in similar lines using long spears and large round shields. They depended on coordination rather than individual skill. In medieval Europe, formations were less organized. Battles often began with long-range weapons like arrows or javelins, but most fighting ended in hand-to-hand combat. Infantry units used spears, axes, and swords. Knights attacked on horseback with lances and followed up with maces or swords once dismounted. Armor reduced deaths from cuts, but increased deaths from blunt trauma. Many soldiers suffocated inside heavy armor after being knocked down. Fights were short. Many battles ended in less than an hour. Once one side lost formation, panic spread quickly. Soldiers fled and were often killed while running. Commanders tried to maintain order using flags, drums, or horns, but communication usually failed once combat began. Dust, noise, and confusion made it impossible to control troops. Close combat was physically exhausting. Soldiers carried weapons weighing several kilograms and wore armor that limited movement. After a few minutes of intense fighting, fatigue decided the outcome more than skill. Injuries were severe. Broken bones, deep cuts, and internal bleeding were common. Medical help was rare. Many wounded died after the battle from infection or blood loss. Ancient and medieval armies relied heavily on morale. Once confidence collapsed, even large forces could be destroyed. The Roman army focused on discipline to prevent this. Medieval armies lacked such structure, which made them more vulnerable to sudden defeat. Most soldiers were not professionals. They were farmers, townsmen, or conscripts who fought only when ordered. Their main goal was to survive, not to seek glory. Real combat did not resemble the staged duels shown in films. There were no long sword exchanges or dramatic speeches. Most encounters ended in seconds. The first strike or fall often decided life or death. Fighting in these periods was direct, violent, and short. It was determined by endurance, coordination, and luck rather than style or heroism. Number 2. What soldiers actually carried. Ancient and medieval soldiers carried practical equipment. Each item had a specific use in combat or survival. Roman legionaries carried about 27 kilograms of gear. Their standard kit included a helmet, a rectangular shield, a short sword called a gladius, and 2 javelins. They also carried food, a water flask, a cloak, a cooking pot, a shovel, and spare sandals. Their pack was attached to a wooden pole to make marching easier. The Roman army required every man to carry tools because soldiers built camps, roads, and fortifications without separate laborers. Greek hoplites carried a bronze helmet, a round shield, a spear, and a short sword. The shield was heavy and covered much of the body. It provided protection but limited movement. Hoplites also carried basic food and water for 1 or 2 days. Armor was made of bronze plates or linen reinforced with glue and fabric. It protected well against cuts, but not against strong thrusts. Medieval soldiers carried simpler and more varied gear. Wealthy knights used expensive plate or chainmail armor that could weigh more than 25 kilograms. They also carried swords, lances, maces, and daggers. Maintaining this equipment required servants, oil, and constant repair. Most common soldiers could not afford armor. They wore padded jackets called gambesons, made of layered fabric. Their weapons were agricultural tools adapted for war, such as spears, axes, or clubs. Shields were made of wood covered with leather. Archers and crossbowmen carried bows, strings, and quivers with 20 to 40 arrows or bolts. They also used knives for close defense. Their clothing was lighter to allow movement. Ammunition was stored in wooden boxes carried by supply wagons. Siege soldiers and engineers carried hammers, picks, and ropes for constructing or destroying fortifications. Food and water were always limited. Soldiers carried bread, dried meat, and ale or wine instead of water. During long campaigns, they depended on local resources or looting. Hygiene items were minimal. Few carried spare clothing or medical supplies. Many soldiers became sick from poor diet and contaminated water. Most armies required each man to transport his own gear. Pack animals were used only for officers or supplies. The total weight often exceeded what a man could comfortably carry. Fatigue and wear caused many soldiers to discard non-essential items during long marches. The equipment that remained was basic, functional, and focused on survival rather than appearance. Number 3. The brutality of medieval tactics. Medieval warfare focused on speed, shock, and morale. Battles usually lasted less than an hour. The main objective was to break the enemy line as fast as possible. Commanders relied on heavy cavalry, dense infantry formations, and missile troops. The first contact between armies often determined the result. Soldiers aimed to disrupt coordination rather than destroy every opponent. Once one side lost order, defeat followed quickly. Cavalry charges were common in Western Europe. Knights fought in groups called lances or conroy. They carried lances, swords, and maces. Horses were trained to push into infantry ranks. A successful charge could scatter unprepared troops, but a failed one caused heavy losses. Long pikes and stakes stopped many cavalry attacks. Horses were vulnerable targets, and once a rider fell, the armor made escape difficult. Infantry soldiers used knives or axes to finish immobilized opponents. Archers and crossbowmen played a decisive role. The English longbow could shoot up to 10 arrows per minute and reach targets at about 200 meters. Arrows with narrow steel heads penetrated mail and lighter armor. Crossbows were slower but stronger. They required less training and were used in sieges and open battles. Large numbers of archers could weaken advancing cavalry before close combat began. At the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, English archers caused massive French losses before any direct engagement. Infantry formations used pikes, halberds, or bills to counter cavalry and armored men. Groups of soldiers formed tight defensive blocks. Each man depended on the one beside him to keep formation. Discipline and timing were critical. The Swiss and Flemish militias became effective using this method. They defeated many mounted armies despite having fewer resources. Command and communication on the battlefield were limited. Leaders used flags, horns, or drums to send signals. Noise and confusion made control difficult. Once orders were lost, units acted independently. Many medieval armies lacked unified command structures, which led to disorganization. Siege warfare was frequent because open field battles were risky. Armies surrounded castles and used trebuchets, battering rams, and mining to destroy defenses. Defenders used arrows, boiling water, and stones to repel attackers. Starvation and disease often ended sieges faster than direct assaults. Medieval tactics aimed to create quick psychological collapse. Casualties were high after one side broke formation. Pursuit and capture caused more death than the main clash. Victory depended on coordination, discipline, and the ability to maintain morale under pressure. Number 4. The hidden life of warriors. Life for ancient and medieval soldiers outside of battle was harsh and unhealthy. Military camps were temporary settlements built near rivers, forests, or towns. Sanitation was poor. Waste disposal was inconsistent, which caused outbreaks of dysentery, typhus, and other infections. Medical knowledge was limited. Doctors relied on herbal mixtures and basic surgery without understanding infection. Amputations were done with knives or saws, often without anesthesia. Survival after surgery was uncommon. Food supplies depended on local resources and transport capacity. armies carried grain, salted meat, and hard bread. When provisions ran out, soldiers lived off the land through foraging or theft. Spoiled food was eaten when nothing else was available. Clean water was difficult to find, so soldiers drank diluted wine or beer. Lack of nutrition weakened immune systems and reduced combat readiness. Hunger and dehydration caused more deaths than direct combat during long campaigns. Hygiene was almost non-existent. Bathing was rare because water sources were used for animals and waste. Lice and fleas spread quickly through clothing and bedding. Skin diseases were common. Soldiers wore the same garments for weeks or months without washing them. Dental problems led to infections that could be fatal. Medical treatment for wounds was limited to bandages, honey, vinegar, or cauterization with hot metal. Shelter consisted of tents, wooden huts, or makeshift structures. During cold months, many soldiers froze or became sick due to damp conditions. Heating and ventilation were poor. Rotting food and animal waste attracted rats, which carried disease. Camps often became breeding grounds for epidemics that spread across entire armies. Mental health was not recognized as a medical issue. Soldiers who experienced trauma received no treatment. Many showed signs of psychological distress described in historical records as madness or possession. Fear and exhaustion were constant. Discipline was maintained through punishment, including whipping or execution for disobedience. Despite strict control, desertion was common. Relationships within military groups were based on necessity. Soldiers depended on each other for protection and supplies. They shared food, repaired weapons, and cared for the wounded. Burial of dead comrades was a regular duty when conditions allowed. Music and communal meals helped maintain morale. Bonds formed in service often lasted after the campaign ended. The daily life of soldiers was defined by disease, hunger, and fatigue. Their environment was unsanitary and unstable. Survival depended on endurance and cooperation more than on military skill or weapon strength. Number 5. Honor, religion, and fear. Religion and belief systems played a central role in ancient and medieval warfare. Soldiers often fought under the authority of rulers who claimed divine support. In Europe, Christian doctrine shaped the values of armies. Knights and commanders viewed military service as a duty to God and their king. Before battles, priests blessed troops and weapons. Crosses were displayed on banners and shields. During the Crusades, participants were promised forgiveness of sins for fighting in the Holy Land. Religious motivation increased morale and justified violence against enemies defined as non-believers. In the Islamic world, armies fought under similar spiritual principles. Soldiers were encouraged by religious leaders to defend their faith and communities. The promise of paradise for those who died in combat strengthened discipline and loyalty. In ancient Rome, religion was integrated into the military system. Soldiers swore oaths to the emperor and to gods such as Mars and Jupiter. Breaking an oath or deserting was punished by execution. Roman legions carried standards believed to possess divine protection. Each campaign began with sacrifices and prayers for victory. Among Norse and Germanic warriors, belief in Valhalla influenced their attitude toward death. Dying in battle was seen as an honorable end that granted eternal life among gods and heroes. Pagan rituals before combat included chants and offerings meant to secure favor from spiritual forces. Similar customs existed across other ancient cultures. Greek and Persian armies also performed sacrifices and sought omens before marching to war. Fear remained constant despite religious conviction. Most soldiers were not motivated by faith alone. They were often conscripted or bound by duty to local lords. Commanders used religion to maintain control and prevent panic. Disobedience was punished severely. Public executions for cowardice or desertion were common in both ancient and medieval armies. Honor was defined by obedience and endurance rather than individual heroism. Soldiers were expected to follow orders regardless of personal belief. Rewards were given for loyalty and success in battle. Failure or retreat brought shame and punishment. There were no formal medals or recognition for bravery. Survival itself was considered an achievement. The combination of faith, Fear and discipline sustained armies through long campaigns. Religion provided moral justification for killing and dying. Honor maintained social order within the ranks. Fear of punishment ensured compliance. Together, these forces shaped the mindset of soldiers across centuries of warfare. Number 6. When the Age of Knights ended. The decline of knights began with the introduction of gunpowder weapons in Europe during the 14th century. Cannons first appeared in sieges and quickly changed military architecture. Stone castle walls could no longer resist heavy artillery. Fortifications were redesigned with lower, thicker walls and angled bastions. Traditional medieval castles lost their defensive value within a few decades. Portable firearms developed soon after. The early hand cannon evolved into the arquebus and musket. These weapons allowed common infantrymen to kill armored opponents from a distance. Plate armor that had protected knights for centuries became ineffective. A musket ball could penetrate steel that no arrow or sword could damage. The cost and weight of full armor made it impractical. Many soldiers began wearing lighter protection or abandoned armor entirely. The social structure that supported knighthood also weakened. Feudal lords could no longer rely on vassals to provide mounted warriors. Standing armies funded by centralized governments replaced feudal levies. Soldiers were paid wages instead of serving out of obligation. Professional mercenaries became common across Europe. Companies of Swiss pikemen and German landsknechts fought for any ruler who could afford them. Warfare became an organized industry rather than a personal duty. Tactics changed to match the new weapons. Cavalry charges lost effectiveness against disciplined formations of pikemen and gunmen. Infantry armed with long pikes defended musketeers during reloading. Combined formations known as pike and shot dominated the battlefield throughout the 16th century. Firearms required coordination and timing rather than individual combat skill. This shift reduced the importance of the knight's training and replaced chivalric combat with collective firepower. Economic and political changes reinforced this transformation. Monarchs needed large, permanent armies to maintain power. Feudal bonds gave way to state-controlled militaries. The knightly class lost influence as the cost of warfare increased, and as noble titles became symbolic rather than functional. The introduction of artillery and muskets ended the age of personal heroism in combat. By the 17th century, knights existed mostly as ceremonial figures. Their role in battle had been replaced by officers commanding regiments of infantry and artillery. The image of the mounted warrior survived in literature and art, but no longer reflected military reality. Gunpowder, discipline, and mass organization defined modern warfare. The medieval model of individual valor and armored combat disappeared with the rise of firearms and centralized armies.